Hello, BookTube, and welcome to our read aloud of Can You Forgive Her by Anthony Trollope. We are up to chapter 12, in which let's try to learn a little bit more about the wild man, George Vavasor. We've already been told by his nearest and dearest, including his own sister, that nobody really knows where he goes, where he lives, anything really private about him. Nobody does. They might be restricted, but Trollope's narrator is not. He can go wherever he wants. So now we get a chapter called George Vavasor at Home. It cannot perhaps be fairly said that George Vavasor was an inhospitable man. Now, keep in mind, the narrator will often make statements like this. They'll say, so-and-so is not a bad person, and then we'll go on for a whole chapter to describe what can only be thought of as a bad person. Here we're being told it cannot perhaps fairly be said George Vavasor was an inhospitable man. So pay attention to the portrait that we get as the chapter unfolds. Seeing that it was his custom to entertain his friends occasionally at Greenwich or Richmond or such places, and he would now and again give a friend to dine with him at his club. Hospitality begins at home. Notice all these signs of his hospitality are not taking place in his home. But he never gave breakfasts, dinners, or suppers under his own roof. During a short period with his wine-selling career, at which time he occupied handsome rooms over his place of business in New Burlington Street, he had presided at certain feasts given to customers or expected customers by the firm, but he had not found this employment to be to his taste, and had soon relinquished it to one of the other partners. Since then, he had lived in lodgings at Cecil Street, down at the bottom of a retired nook near to the river and away from the Strand. Here he had simply 2 rooms on the first floor, and hither his friends came to him very rarely. They came very rarely on any account. A stray man might now and then pass an hour with him here, but on such occasions the chances were that the visit had some reference, near or distant, to affairs of business. Eating or drinking there was never any to be found here by the most intimate of his allies. His lodgings were his private retreat, and they were so private that but few of his friends knew where he lived. That is not a hospitable man. And had it been possible, he would have wished that no one should have known his whereabouts. I am not aware that he had any special reason for this peculiarity, or that there was anything about his mode of life that required hiding, but he was a man who had always lived as though secrecy in certain matters might at any time become useful to him. He had a mode of dressing himself when he went out at night that made it almost impossible that anyone should recognize him. In other words, he acts like a criminal. The people at his lodgings did not even know that he had relatives, and his nearest relatives had hardly knew that he had lodgings. Even Kate had never been to the rooms in Cecil Street, and addressed all her letters to his place of business or his club. He was a man who would bear no inquiry into himself. If he had been out of view for a month and his friends asked him where he had been, he would always answer the question falsely or left it unanswered. There are many men of whom everybody knows all about their belongings, as to whom everybody knows where they live, whither they go, what is their means, and how they spend it, but there are others of whom no man knows anything, and George Vavasor was such a one. For myself, I like the open babbler the best. Babbling may be a weakness, but to my thinking, mystery is a vice. Vavasor also maintained another little establishment down in Oxfordshire, but the 2 establishments did not know of each other's existence. There was a third, too, very closely hidden from the world's eye, which shall be nameless for now. But of the establishment in Oxfordshire, he did speak sometimes, in very humble words among his friends. When he found himself among hunting men, he would speak of his 2 nags at Roebury, saying that he had never yet been able to mount a regular hunting stable, and that he supposed he never would, but that there were at Rosebery 2 indifferent beasts of his, if anyone chose to buy them. And men very often did buy Vavasor's horses. When he was on them, he always went well and sold them readily. And though he spoke of 2, and perhaps did not keep more during the summer, he always seemed to have more horses enough when he was down in the country. No one ever knew George Vavasor not to hunt because he was short of stuff. And here, at Roebury, he kept a trusty servant, an ancient groom with 2 little bushy gray eyes that looked as though they could see through a stable door. Many were the long whisperings which George and Bat Smithers carried out at the stable door, in the very back of the depth of the yard attached to the hunting inn at Roebury. Bat regarded his master as a man who wholly devoted to horses, but often wondered why he was not more regular in his sojourning into Oxfordshire. Or of any other portion of his master's life, Bat knew nothing. Bat could give one address of his master's club in London, but he could give no other address. Knows nothing about George's love life, for instance, or his runs at Parliament. But though George Vavasor's private lodgings were so very private, he had, nevertheless, taken some trouble in adorning them. The furniture in the sitting room was very neat, and the bookshelves were filled with volumes that shone with gilding on their backs. The inkstand, the paperweight, the envelope case on his writing table were all handsome. He had a single good portrait of a woman's head hanging on one of the walls. He had a special place adopted for his pistols, over his foils, another for his foils, and again another for his whips. The room was as pretty a bachelor's room as you would wish to enter, but you might see by the position of the single easy chair that was brought forward that it was seldom appropriated for the comforts of more than one person. Here he sat lounging over his breakfast, late on a Sunday morning in September when all the world was out of town. He was reading a letter which had just been brought down to him from his club. Though the writer of it was his sister Kate, she was not been given the privilege to address it to his private lodgings. But he's a hospitable man. He read it very quickly, running rapidly over its contents, and then threw it aside from him as though it were of no moment, keeping, however, an enclosure in his hand. And yet the letter was of much moment, and made him think deeply. If I did it at all, he said, it would be more with the object of cutting him out than any other. I think we can guess what he's thinking of, and probably what Kate has written about. We probably don't need to go on. He has a rival for Alice Vavasor's love. And here he's saying that it's not her money that would motivate him, or even love. It's just getting rid of her lover, John Gray, about beating him. The reader will hardly require to be told who him in question was John Gray, and that Kate's letter was one instigating her brother to renew his love affair with her. And Vavasor was in truth well inclined to renew it, and would have begun the renewing at once had he not doubted his power with his cousin. Indeed, it has been seen that he had already attempted some commencement of such a renewal at Basel. He had told Kate more than once that Alice's fortune was not much, and that her beauty was past its prime, and he would no doubt repeat the same objections to his sister with some pretense of disinclination. It was not his custom to show his hand to the players at any game that he played, but he was, in truth, very anxious to obtain from Alice a second promise of her hand. How soon after that he might marry her would be another question. You are free at this point to dislike this character. Very much so, you are free. Perhaps it was not Alice's beauty that he coveted, nor yet her money exclusively. Nevertheless, he thought her very beautiful, and was fully aware that her money would be of great service to him. But I believe that he was true in that word that he spoke to himself, and that his chief attraction was the delight in which he would have in robbing Mr. Gray of his wife. Alice had once been his love, had clung to his side, had whispered love to him. He had had enough of the weakness of humanity in him to feel the soreness arising from her affection for another. When she broke away from him, he had acknowledged that he had been wrong, and when, since her engagement with Mr. Gray, he had congratulated her, he had told her in his quiet, half-whispered, impressive words how right she was. But not the less, therefore, did he feel himself hurt that John Gray should be her lover. And when he had met this man, he had spoken well of him to his sister, saying that he was a gentleman, a scholar, and a man of parts, but not the less had he hated him, from the first moment of his seeing him. Such hatred under such circumstances was almost pardonable, but George Vavasor, when he hated, was apt to follow up his hatred with injury. He could not violently dislike a man and yet not wish to do him harm. At present, as he sat lounging in his chair, he thought that he would like to marry his cousin Alice, but he was quite sure that he would like to be the means of putting a stop to the proposed marriage between Alice and Mr. Gray. Kate had been very false to her friend, and had sent up to her brother the very letter which Alice had written to her after meeting in Queen Anne Street, which had just been described in the last chapter, or rather a portion of it, for which, with the reserve common to women, she kept back the other half. She's sending him Alice's private letters. Alice had declared to herself that she would like to be sure of her cousin's sympathy, and had written out all her heart on the matter, and as was her wont when writing to Kate. But you must understand, she wrote, that all that I said to him went for nothing. I had determined to make him know that everything between us must be over, but I failed. I found that I had no words at my command, and that he was able to talk to me as though I were a child. This is in reference to her telling John Gray, we must at least postpone our engagement, but even then I'm not sure that we should be engaged. And as I've mentioned, John Gray treats her as though she is ill, physically ill. He told me that I was sick and full of fantasies, and bade me change the air. As he spoke in this way, I could not help feeling how right he was to use me so. I felt that also that he, in his mighty superiority, could never be a fitting husband for a creature so inferior to him as I am. Though I altogether failed to make him understand that it was so, every moment that we were together made me more fixed in my resolution. This letter from Alice to Kate, Vavasor read over and over again, though Kate's letter to himself, which was longer one, he had thrown aside at first glance. There was nothing that he could learn from that. He was as good a judge of the matter in which he could play his own game as Kate could be, but in this matter he was to learn how he would play his game from a knowledge other than a girl's mind. She'll never marry him, at any rate, he said to himself, and she is right. He'd make an upper servant of her, very respectable, no doubt, but still only an upper servant. Not with me. Well, I hardly know what I should make of her. I cannot think of myself as a married man. You would make her a lower servant, George. She would be much more miserable with you than she would be with boring old John Gray. Then he threw the paper after Kate's and betook himself to his newspaper and his cigar. It was 2 hours after this, and he still wore his dressing gown, and he was still lounging in his easy-chair when the waiting maid in the lodgings brought him up word that a gentleman wished to see him. Vavasor kept no servant of his own except a confidential groom down in Bicester, it was a rule with him that people could be better served and cheaper served by other people's servants than by his own. Even in the stables at Bicester, the innkeeper had to find what assistance was wanted and charge for it in the bill. And George Vavasor was no sybarite. He did not deem it impractical to put on his own trousers without having a man standing at his foot to hold up the leg of the garment. A valet about a man knows a great deal of a man's ways, and therefore George had no valet. A gentleman, he said to the girl. Does the gentleman look like a public housekeeper? Well, I think he do, said the girl. Then show him up, said George. And the gentleman was a public housekeeper. Vavasor was pretty sure of his visitor before he desired the servant to give him entrance. It was Mr. Grimes, of the Handsome Man public house and tavern in the Brompton Road, and he had come by appointment to have a little conversation with Mr. Vavasor on matters political. George Vavasor has political ambitions. Mr. Grimes was a man who knew that business was business, and as such had some considerable weight in his own neighborhood. With him, politics was business as well as beer, and omnibus horses, and foreign wines, and in the fabrication of the latter article Mr. Grimes was supposed to have an extended experience. To such as him, when intent on business, Mr. Vavasor was not averse to make known the secrets of his lodging-house, and now, when the idle London world was either at morning church or still in bed, Mr. Grimes had come out by appointment to do a little political business with the lately rejected member of the Chelsea districts. Vavasor had been, as I have said, lately rejected. In other words, he stood for Parliament and they didn't want him. Probably because of what he looks like. And the new member who had beaten him at the hustings had sat now for one session in Parliament. Under his present reign, he was destined for the honour of one other session, and then the period of his existing glory, for which he is said to have paid nearly £6,000, would be over. But he might be elected again, perhaps for the full period of 6 sessions, and it might be hoped that this second election would be conducted on more economical principles. To this, the economical view of the matter, Mr. Grimes was very much opposed, and was now waiting upon George Vavasor in Cecil Street chiefly with the object of opposing the new member's wishes on the head. No doubt Mr. Grimes was personally in advance for the return of Mr. Vavasor, and would do all in his power to prevent the re-election of the young Lord Kilfenora, whose father, the Marquis of Bunratty, had scattered the £6,000 among the electors and non-electors of Chelsea. But his main object was that money should be spent. "'Tain't altogether for myself,' he said to his confidential friend in the same way of business. "I don't get much on it. Perhaps sometimes not none. May be I've a bill against some of the gents for not paid this very moment. But it's the game I looks to. If the game dies away, it'll never got up again. Never. Who'll care about elections then? Anybody go and get himself elected if he was to let the game go by. And so that game might go by. So the game might not go by. Mr. Grimes was now present in Mr. George Vavasor's rooms. "Well, Mr. Grimes," said George, "how are you this morning? Sit down, Mr. Grimes. If ever a man were as punctual as you are, the world would go like clockwork, wouldn't it?" "Business is business, Mr. Vavasor," said the publican, after having made his salute and having taken his chair with some little show of mock modesty. "That's my maxim. If I didn't stick to it, that nothing would ever stick to me, and nothing doesn't much as it is. Time is very bad, Mr. Vavasor." "Of course they are. They are always bad. What was the devil made for, except that they should be bad? But I should have thought you publicans were the last men who ought to complain." "Well, Lord love you, Mr. Vavasor, why, I suppose that of all men as is put upon, we're put upon the worst. What's the good of drawing beer if the more you draw, the more you don't make? Yesterday, as ever, was that Saturday, and we drawed £3 10/9. What'll that come to, Mr. Vavasor, when you reckon it up with the brewer? Why, it's next to nothing. You knows that very well. Upon my word, I don't. I don't know. I know you don't sell a pint of beer without getting a profit off it. Oh, Lord love you, Mr. Vavasor, if I had nothing to look at but beer, I couldn't put a house over my head. No, I couldn't. That house of mine belongs to the Muse people, and very good people they are, too. Have made a sight of money, haven't they, Mr. Vavasor? I had to get my beer from them, in course. Why not, when it's their house? But if I sells their stuff as I gets it, there ain't a halfpenny coming to me out of a gallon. Look at that, now. But then you don't sell it as you get it. You stretch it. That's in course. I'm not going to tell you a lie, Mr. Vavasor. You know what's all that, you know as well as I do, and a sight better, I expect. There's a dozen different ways of handling beer, Mr. Vavasor, and what's the use of that? When they can take 4 or 5 pounds a day over the counter for their rot-gut stuff at the Cadogan Arms. And I can't do not better yet, perhaps so well, for a real honest glass of beer. Stretch it. My belief, the more you poison their liquor, the more the people likes it. Mr. Grimes was a stout man, not very tall, with a mottled red face and large protruding eyes. As regards his own person, Mr. Grimes might have been taken for a fair sample of the English innkeeper as described for many years past. But in his outer garments he was very unlike that description. He wore a black swallow-tailed coat, made, however, to set very loosely upon his back, a black waistcoat, and black pantaloons. He carried, moreover, in his hands a black chimney-pot hat. Not only have the top boots and breeches vanished from the costume of innkeepers, but also the long, party-colored waistcoat and the bird's-eye fogle round their neck. They get themselves up looking like dissenting ministers or undertakers, except that there is still something about their rosy gills which tells the tale of spigot and corkscrew. That, in other words, is Trollope writing for money. He is padding this chapter. Mr. Grimes was only just finished telling the tale of his own hard ways as a publican when the doorbell rang again. "There's Scrooby," said Mr. Vavasor. "Now we can get down to business." And that is the chapter, comparatively short, and only meant to tell us that, a little bit more about George Vavasor. He is thoroughly unlikable. You have my permission to dislike this character, but also to tell us that he has business afoot, political business, for which he might need money. So that is that chapter. We will move on next time, and I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.